They mocked her over a tiny stain, ripped her shirt in front of the entire base, and laughed at the tattoo on her back like it was some cheap mistake. But the woman they humiliated that morning wasn't weak, embarrassed, or broken. She was the ghost operative sent back to destroy the man who betrayed his own soldiers.
Have you ever been publicly humiliated for something so small it was ridiculous? Well, Colonel Victor Hale was about to make an art form of it. His voice sliced through the freezing dawn air. Captain Anders, if you can't even manage basic uniform standards, maybe you're in over your head. 60 officers and trainees watched, their breath hanging like smoke in the cold. And in the middle of it all stood one woman, Captain Leia Anders. She was 5'4", with dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful, and eyes like a gathering storm. She just stood there, perfectly still, her chest rising and falling in a slow, controlled rhythm. If you think you know how this ends, stick around, because you are in for a surprise. The colonel came down from his platform, his boots clacking on the pavement. He stalked around her like a wolf circling its prey. "Do you all see this?" He boomed, pointing at a tiny grease spot on her gray workout shirt, almost invisible in the faint light. "This is what happens when we let our standards slip. When we allow time's distractions, asterisk." He said that last word with a sneer, and everyone knew he was talking about her being a woman. A few guys in the formation snickered. Laya's expression never changed, but if you looked closely, you'd see her knuckles were bone white. Hale got right in her face, his coffee breath washing over her. "I ought to send you right back to the boring desk job you came from. But first," Hale bellowed, "Corporal Briggs, get up here!" A giant of a man stepped out of the ranks. Jake Briggs, a 240-pound former linebacker who was all muscle and ego, and he'd been smiling ear to ear this whole time. "Sir!" he barked. Hale waved a hand, the captain's undershirt. "I need you to inspect times it for regulation." The command was so wrong, it just hung there in the silent air. Briggs paused for a split second before stepping behind Laia. She didn't even flinch, just kept up her slow, steady breathing. Briggs grabbed the collar of her shirt. "Ma'am, this'll just take a second," he said, his voice dripping with fake politeness. And then he times it. The sound of tearing cloth was like a gunshot in the quiet morning. The shirt tore open all the way down her back. A sudden blast of cold air hit her skin, and a wave of gasps went through the crowd. But they weren't gasping at the humiliation. They were staring at what was underneath. Her entire back was covered in a breathtakingly detailed tattoo. It was a massive hawk, its wings stretching from one shoulder to the other, talons sharp and ready. Every single feather was perfect. There was writing in the center of the bird's chest and more along its wings. Too small to read from a distance, but the quality was undeniable. This was no cheap tattoo shop ink. This was a masterpiece. And it was something more. In the back of the formation, an old veteran's eyes narrowed, but then the laughter started. "Whoa, that's a serious bird," someone whispered. "Did she get that at the city zoo?" Another guy called out, and the snickering erupted. Colonel Hale just stood back with his arms crossed, a smug look on his face. "Well, Captain, I have to say, that's impressive," he said, mocking her. "Tell me, how much did that piece of art set you back? More than your signing bonus?" The crowd laughed harder. Laia didn't move a muscle, the ruined shirt just hanging from her shoulders. As the sun came up, the light hit the tattoo, making the hawk seem almost alive. Hale squinted at the text on the bird's chest. "What's it say there?" "Probably something cheesy like live, laugh, love," he joked, and the formation howled with laughter. Briggs, still holding a piece of her shirt, chimed in. "Looks like one of those tough guy tattoos, sir. The kind you get after watching too many action flicks." Hale nodded like he was sharing some great wisdom. "Ah, yes, the I wish I were a real soldier special. Usually comes with a gym membership and a big truck." He turned to the entire group. "Let this be a lesson to all of you. You can get all the tattoos you want, but you can't fake what really counts. Skill and experience." He glared back at Laia. "Get a new shirt, Captain, and cover that thing up. This is the army, not an art show." With a flick of his wrist, he dismissed everyone. Laia finally let out a slow breath. She turned and walked away, head held high, without saying a word. Behind her, the whispers started up again. Can you believe her? Probably a spring break mistake. Looks like she couldn't afford to finish it. But way in the back, Sergeant Major Thomas Hayes wasn't laughing. Hayes was 58 years old, with 32 years of service under his belt. He'd seen it all, and he saw something the others missed. The style of that ink, it wasn't done in a regular tattoo parlor. That was military ink. The kind guys get in the field, the kind that tells a story. As Laya vanished into the barracks, he looked at the man beside him, Commander Adam Reed, a Navy SEAL. Reed was just staring at the empty spot where Laya had been. Something bothering you, Commander? Hayes asked. Reed slowly shook his head. Her posture, he said. When that brute grabbed her shirt, she didn't even flinch. She just stood there as if it happened to her all the time. Hayes grunted. Used to what? Reed's jaw clenched. Pain. Absolute self-control. The only people I've ever seen stand that still have gone through SARE training. That's survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, brutal training for special operators. Hayes' eyebrows shot up. You think she's more than just an admin officer? Reed didn't reply. Meanwhile, inside the barracks bathroom, Leia looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror. The tattered shirt was ruined, but the hawk on her back stared back, powerful under the flickering lights. She pulled a small metal coin from her pocket, its surface worn smooth from being held for years. One side had an engraved bird, the other had a serial number. She rubbed her thumb across it before setting it gently on the sink. Her face in the mirror was a perfect mask, no anger, no embarrassment, just that steady breathing. And then, for the first time all morning, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a master chess player watching their opponent walk right into a trap. She put on a clean shirt, pocketed the coin, and walked back out into the hornet's nest. For the rest of the day, she was the target of every joke and snide remark. At breakfast, someone cracked a joke about flying away from her duties. An instructor asked if she had any other hidden artwork. Laya ignored it all. She did her paperwork, filed her reports, and handled logistics, the boring stuff that makes people invisible. By lunch, her name was a joke. Pulling an Anders meant pretending to be tough, but being all talk. A gossip-loving lieutenant even started a group chat with a cartoon of a bird titled The Do-Nothing Hawk. Over 20 people joined the chat within an hour. Laya didn't see any of it, but she saw everything else. She was watching, noting who laughed the loudest, who looked away, and who looked just a little bit scared. Back in his office, Colonel Hale pulled her file. Captain Laya Anders, age 29, intelligence analyst, stationed at a few bases, now a liaison officer. Her record showed 0 combat, 0 field missions, 0 anything of interest. He slammed the folder shut, completely satisfied. Just another desk jockey playing dress-up, he thought. He'd seen her type 100 times. The tattoo was probably her one big adventure. But Hale had a bigger problem. Laya represented a crack in his perfectly controlled world, and he couldn't afford any cracks right now. Not with a big audit on the horizon, and especially not with some shady financial deals he needed to keep hidden. He had to make an example of her, and fast. He decided to show everyone what real competence looked like. He made a phone call. The very next morning, Hale made a special announcement. Captain Anders, you're being reassigned. You'll be joining Bravo Team for today's live-fire, close-quarters combat drill. A deadly silence fell over the room. Since you seem so keen on appearances, he continued with a thin smile, this is your chance to prove there's something underneath. Your gear is waiting. Be at the range at 0800. This wasn't training for analysts. This was a high-stakes, high-pressure exercise designed for elite soldiers, and he had just thrown her right into the middle of it. Shoving a desk officer into a high-stakes tactical drill wasn't a test, it was a setup. And Laya knew it was probably both. She gave a single, crisp nod. Yes, sir. When she got to the range, she saw the gear they'd left for her. The rifle was an old model with a stock covered in scratches, and the sights were visibly off-center. A blind man could see it. Her tactical vest was 2 sizes too big, draping over her small frame like a cheap poncho, and the earpiece buzzed with static even when it was off. Bravo team was nearby, gearing up, all of them seasoned operators. They watched her with a mix of pity and outright amusement. Corporal Miles Chen was the first to speak up. "Ma'am, no offense, but have you actually done this before?" Laya just tightened the vest straps. "I'll manage." Chen shot a look at his teammates. "Right. Okay, well, the drill's straightforward. Clear 3 rooms. We've got hostage targets mixed in with hostiles. We go in together, neutralize the bad guys, and secure the good guys. You'll be on rear security. Basically, just stay behind us and try not to shoot one of us by mistake." The team leader, Staff Sergeant Travis Cole, stepped in. He had a calmer, older presence. "Captain, if this isn't in your wheelhouse, there's no shame in sitting this one out. This is advanced stuff." Laya met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I'll manage," she said again. Cole let out a heavy sigh. "All right, it's your neck," the buzzer blared. The team stacked up on the door, and Laya fell in at the back, her rifle held low and ready. The door blew open. Smoke and shouts filled the air as the team poured inside like a single organism, each man covering his zone. Laya followed them in. They cleared the first room in a heartbeat. 2 hostiles down. No hostages. They pushed into the second room, and that's when it all went sideways. The team moved in too fast, too cocky. They failed to check the deep corner. A hidden target suddenly popped into view. Chen instinctively raised his rifle, but his angle was all wrong. He'd hit a hostage if he fired. He froze. Cole yelled, "Chen, hold fire! Get a new angle!" But the clock was ticking. In a live drill, if the threat wasn't neutralized in 3 seconds, the whole team failed. Cole muttered a curse under his breath. That's when Laya moved. Not forward, but sideways. 2 quick steps to her right, instantly creating a clean line of sight. Her rifle came up in one fluid motion. A single shot, dead center. The hostile target snapped backward. Chen just stared. "How did you?" But Laya was already moving toward the third room. Cole blinked, shaking off his surprise, and followed. The final room was pure chaos. 4 targets, 2 hostages, all packed into a tight space. As the team tried to find their angles, they kept getting in each other's way. Somebody had to take a dangerous shot. Laya didn't even pause. She dropped to one knee, creating a lower shooting platform, and fired 2 precise shots. 2 more hostiles went down. The hostages were completely untouched. The drill was over. "Clear," the range officer's voice announced over the intercom. "Time, 47 seconds. That's a new facility record." A stunned silence fell over the team. The officer added, "For the record, the previous best was 52 seconds, held by a SEAL team instructor." The men just stood there, speechless. Chen looked down at his high-tech rifle, then back at Laya. "What in the world?" Cole's face had gone from irritated to utterly baffled. "Captain, where did you learn to shoot like that?" Laya cleared her rifle and ejected the magazine. "Practice," she said flatly. She placed the weapon on the table and walked out, leaving the entire team staring after her. Cole immediately pulled out his phone and started texting. From the observation deck above, Hayes leaned closer to the monitor. "Run that back," he ordered. The technician replayed the footage in slow motion. Hayes focused on Laya's footwork, the way she sliced the corners, the perfect low-ready carry, the impeccable trigger discipline. Every single movement was brutally efficient, honed by years of training. This wasn't practice. This was pure muscle memory, the kind you only get from countless deployments and real-world firefights. He zoomed in on her grip, her thumbs pointing forward, elbows tucked in tight, the exact form used by Tier 1 operators. Hayes leaned back in his chair. "Commander Reed," he said into his comms, "you need to get down here and see this." Reed showed up 10 minutes later. Hayes played the tape without saying a word. Reed watched, his face a mask of concentration. When it was over, he had the tech rewind to the shot Laya took in the second room. Freeze it there. Reed stared at the screen, analyzing her stance, her posture, the way her head was tilted. "That's a JSOC technique," he said, his voice low. He was talking about the Joint Special Operations Command, the elite of the elite, like Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. Specifically, the way she's using the door frame to steady her aim. They teach that in the Advanced Close Quarters Combat course, the one reserved for people who rescue hostages for a living. Hayes nodded. And her shot grouping, did you see it? Both rounds on the last two targets landed inside a 2-inch circle from 15 feet away while kneeling, with a rifle that had busted sights. Reed rubbed his jaw. She compensated for the bad sights without even test firing it. That means she knew it was off the second she picked it up, which means she knows her weapons Hayes finished for him, like Asterisk really times knows them. They both stared at the frozen image of Laya, her face a perfect picture of calm focus. There was no adrenaline rush, no excitement, just someone doing a job they'd probably done 1,000 times before. Reed pulled out his phone. I'm pulling her file again. He scrolled through the official records. It says right here she's an intelligence analyst. No advanced weapons courses listed. No combat deployments. Nothing. Then where did she learn all this? Hayes wondered aloud. Reed didn't have an answer. Down on the range, Leia was alone. She had stayed behind to pick up her spent shell casings in old habit. She carefully arranged 3 of them on the concrete floor, forming a tiny triangle. She looked at the triangle for a long moment before scattering the casings with the toe of her boot. Old habits die hard, and some were just too dangerous. As she turned to leave, she almost ran into Sergeant Carter, the range officer. He was fidgeting with a pen and a clipboard. Captain Anders, that was something else. Laya just gave him a slight nod. Thank you. Carter cleared his throat. Look, I've been running this range for 8 years. I've seen Green Berets, Rangers, SEALs, even Delta guys come through here, and you just beat every single one of their records. Laya's expression never flickered. The conditions were in my favor. The wind was calm today. Carter blinked in confusion. Wind? Ma'am, this is an indoor range. Exactly, Laya said, walking right past him. Carter stood frozen, his pen hovering over the clipboard. He glanced down at his target analysis sheets. Every single one of her shots had landed in the thoracic triangle, the kill zone. Not a single flyer, not one wasted motion. He'd seen thousands of shooters in his career, but only a tiny fraction had that kind of surgical precision. And every one of them had something in common. They had all seen the real thing. He grabbed his radio. This is range control. I need to get a hold of Commander Reed. Now. It's urgent. If you've ever been underestimated, you know that quiet satisfaction of proving everyone wrong. Go ahead and hit that like button if you agree that actions speak way louder than words. And if you want to see how this quiet storm is about to rock their world, make sure you subscribe, because her story is just getting started. By dinner that night, the news of Laya's incredible performance was all over the base, but it didn't earn her respect. It bred suspicion. In the mess hall, a guy named Foster was holding court. So what? She got lucky on one drill. Big deal. She probably spent weeks practicing that exact scenario. Someone at the table asked, but how would she know which scenario they'd run? Foster waved his hand dismissively. Insider info? Obviously. She's a liaison, isn't she? Probably got a peek at the training schedule. Murmurs of agreement spread around the table. It was the easy answer, the one that made sense to them. A desk jockey cheated to make herself look good. That was a much more comfortable thought than the alternative. At a different table, Briggs was chewing his food, lost in thought. He wasn't at the range, but he'd heard the rumors. 47 seconds. A new record. It unsettled him, not because he thought the story was fake, but because he remembered how Laya had stood perfectly still when he'd accidentally torn her shirt. There was no fear, no anger. It was like she wasn't even there, like she had seen and survived things far worse than a ripped shirt. He shoved his tray away, his appetite gone. Across the room, Laya sat by herself. She ate with a quiet, methodical rhythm. Chicken, rice, and vegetables. Good fuel for the body. She didn't look at the other tables or acknowledge the whispers. It was just 4 bites, a sip of water, 4 more bites, and repeat. From the serving line, Hayes watched her. Even the way she ate was disciplined and controlled. He'd seen prisoners of war eat that way. People who had learned to make every single calorie count because they never knew when their next meal might be. Later that night, Commander Reed was in his quarters, unable to sleep. He couldn't get the image of Leia from the training footage out of his head. The way she moved reminded him of someone, a ghost from his past. The memory was hazy, almost 20 years old. He was just 19, a fresh-faced SEAL right out of training, on a convoy escort mission in Syria. It was a simple job. Protect some VIP analysts moving between safe houses. The analyst was a small, quiet woman. Reed had barely given her a second thought. And then the IED went off. The vehicle in front of them vanished in a ball of fire and smoke. Reed's Humvee was thrown through the air, and he remembered the world turning upside down. He was pinned under a heap of twisted metal, bleeding out, his vision fading. And then he felt a pair of hands, small hands, pulling him from the wreckage. A voice, calm and steady in the chaos. "Stay with me. Breathe in for 4, out for 4. The analyst. She had dragged him to cover, expertly applied pressure to his wounds, and called in the medevac, staying by his side the entire time. Reed had blacked out before he got a good look at her face. When he woke up in a field hospital, she was gone. The official report only listed her as a civilian contractor, her identity classified for security reasons. He had spent years trying to find her, just to say thank you, but the trail had always gone cold. He shot up in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Reed remembered Leia whispering that phrase. It was a simple breathing trick, but it unlocked something in his memory. He flipped open his laptop, diving deep into the classified personnel files. He ran a search. Civilian contractors in Syria between 2017 and 2019. He cross-referenced them with medical staff and intel analysts, females aged 25 to 30. 43 names popped up. Too many. He started adding filters. Certifications in combat casualty care, human intelligence training, specific language skills. The list got shorter. 20 names, then 10, then 5. Finally, a single name loaded on the screen, and the note next to it sent a shiver down his spine. Captain Leia Anders. Assignment, Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell. Status, killed in action, 2019. Record sealed. Reed couldn't look away from the screen. KIA, killed in action. But she was right here, alive, not just walking around, but shattering every record in camp. So either the official database was dead wrong, or somebody had gone to great lengths to fake her death. The next morning, Mission 2 kicked off. Private Lee, a fresh-faced 20-year-old kid from Ohio, was trying way too hard to impress everyone. During an obstacle course, he went for a wall climb and completely misjudged it. His grip failed. He plunged 12 feet, landing hard on the gravel below. A sickening crack echoed through the training yard. Lee let out a piercing scream. His left leg was bent at an impossible angle, making even the toughest soldiers look away. A shard of white bone had ripped right through his skin. Compound fracture. A pool of blood began to form under him. For a second, everyone just froze. Someone finally shouted, "Medic!" But the medic was 300 yards away, busy with a sprained ankle. Best case, it would be 5 minutes before he could get there. Lee just kept screaming, his teammates forming a helpless circle around him as panic started to ripple through the crowd. And then, Leia was there. She knelt beside Lee, her voice cutting clean through the chaos. "Lee, look at me." His eyes, wild with pain and terror, locked onto hers. "Breathe with me," she commanded softly. 4 counts in. She breathed in deeply to show him. Lee choked on a gasp, trying to copy her. 4 counts out. Slowly, his frantic breathing started to even out. But Leia was already in motion. She pulled a small kit from a cargo pocket combat gauze, a SAM splint, nitrile gloves. Where in the world did she get that? That wasn't standard issue gear for a liaison officer. She snapped on the gloves. "This is going to hurt," she said, her voice steady. "But if I don't stabilize this right now, you will lose that leg. Do you understand me?" Lee, with tears carving paths through the dirt on his face, managed a nod. Leia moved with incredible speed and precision. She packed the wound with gauze, applying direct pressure to stop the bleeding. Her hands were perfectly still, no hesitation, no wasted movement at all. She kept talking as she worked, her tone calm and clinical. The human body can lose about 15% of its blood before shock starts to set in. You're at maybe 8%. You're okay. You are going to be okay. Lee latched onto her words like they were the only thing keeping him from passing out. She expertly splinted the leg, immobilizing the break. Then she pulled out a radio. It wasn't the standard training radio, but something smaller, more advanced. She keyed the mic. "This is NATO training actual," she said crisply. "I need immediate medevac. 1 casualty. Compound fracture, left tibia fibula. Heavy bleeding is now controlled. Patient is stable but needs surgical intervention within the next 30 minutes. She then rattled off a perfect 9-line report, the kind used by combat medics under fire. It was flawless. Line 1, grid coordinates. Line 2, radio frequency. Line 3, number of patients. Line 4, special equipment needed. All the way to line 9, patient nationality. The soldiers around her just stared. You don't learn that in a classroom. You learn that by calling in real helicopters while bullets are flying, with lives hanging on every single word you say. The helicopter touched down just 7 minutes later. Paramedics scrambled out, quickly assessed Lee, and got him onto a stretcher. The lead paramedic stopped for a second. "Who did the initial stabilization?" he asked. Someone pointed to Leia. The paramedic glanced at her work, the clean gauze packing, the perfect splint. "This is textbook," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Actually, this is better than textbook. You just saved his leg." Leia stood up, peeling off her blood-soaked gloves. He did the hard part. He stayed calm. The paramedic wasn't buying it. "Ma'am, I've been doing this for 15 years. What you just did? That's tactical combat casualty care. TCC. Where did you train?" Leia didn't even answer. She just turned and walked away, leaving a crowd of whispering soldiers behind her. Hayes pushed his way to the front. He looked down at the gravel, now dark with blood, and at the discarded medical wrappers. His eyes narrowed. TCCC wasn't something they taught to liaison officers. They taught it to medics, rangers, special forces, the people who go to places where help is a long way off. He bent down and picked up one of the glove wrappers. It was standard military issue, but the lot number on it was old. It was from before 2020. That meant these gloves had been sitting in someone's personal kit for years. It meant Leia carried her own trauma supplies just in case. Hayes folded the wrapper and slipped it into his pocket. Over at the field hospital, Lee was being prepped for surgery. His mother had been called, and the doctor said he was going to make a full recovery. The surgeon in charge looked over the intake report and frowned. "Who did the field stabilization on this soldier?" he asked a nurse. "This is graduate-level trauma care." The nurse checked the chart. "A Captain Anders, sir." "A liaison officer." The surgeon read the notes one more time. Then he picked up the phone and called the base commander. "Sir," he said, "we might have a problem, or we might have an asset. I'm not really sure which." That afternoon, Leia was told to report to Major Owen Cross's office. Cross was the admin guy, a thin, balding man who lived and breathed regulations. He didn't even bother to look up when she came in. "Captain Anders, I've been asked to review your medical certifications." Leia stood at perfect attention. "Sir." Cross slid a file across his desk. "According to your official records, you have a basic first aid course you took 6 years ago. There's nothing advanced here, and certainly nothing that would qualify you to perform emergency field surgery." He finally looked up at her. "And yet, you just flawlessly executed a 9-line medevac request and provided TCCC level care. Care that, according to the head surgeon, saved Private Lee's leg, and quite possibly his life." Leia didn't say a word. Cross leaned back in his chair. "So, either our records are wrong, or you have a set of skills you're not telling us about. Which one is it?" "I learned from experience, sir." "What experience?" "Previous postings." Cross's eyes narrowed. "Your file says you were stationed at Fort Bragg and Ramstein. Both were desk jobs. No field time, no deployments," Cross continued. "So, Where exactly did you get this experience? Laya held his gaze without flinching. Sometimes, sir, people learn skills outside of official channels. Cross just stared at her for a long, silent moment. Then he snapped the file shut. I'm gonna pretend this conversation never happened. But you need to understand something, Captain. People are starting to ask questions. And when people ask questions, they usually find answers, whether you want them to or not. Laya nodded. Understood, sir. She turned and left. Cross watched her go, then picked up his phone. Colonel Hale, we need to talk about Anders. That night, Foster's group chat was on fire. Someone had leaked pictures of Laya treating Lee. There were close-ups of her hands, the way she packed the gauze, the perfect splint. A medic in the chat started analyzing her technique. This is no amateur, he typed. Whoever did this has done it before, probably a dozen times, and under extreme pressure. Foster tried to downplay it. She probably just took a weekend course or watched some YouTube videos. But nobody was buying it. You don't learn this from a video, someone shot back. You learn this by getting your hands dirty for real. The chat fell silent for a moment. Then someone posted the question that was on everyone's mind. What if she's not just a liaison? No one answered. The question just hung there, making everyone uneasy. If Laya wasn't who she said she was, then what was she? And why was she here? At that very moment, Reed was sitting in Hayes' office. The two of them sat in silence, rewatching the training yard footage of Laya saving Lee's life. Hayes was the first to speak. I checked the lot numbers on her medical gear. It dates back to 2018. That equipment is over 6 years old, which means she's been carrying her own personal trauma kit since at least 2018, Reed added. And the way she talked to Lee, keeping him from panicking, that's textbook psychological first aid. PFA. They teach that to people who have to deal with combat stress all the time. Hayes nodded. Operators, medics, people who see horrific injuries so often, they need a strategy to keep their patients from going into psychological shock. Reed rubbed his forehead. I found something else, deep in the classified database. There was a unit, Reed said, called the Ghost Hawk Intelligence Cell. They operated covertly in Syria and Iraq from 2017 to 2019. Reconnaissance, human intel, direct action when they had to. What happened to them? Hayes asked. Reed's voice turned grim. The whole operation was shut down in 2019. Most of the team was listed as killed in action. The identities of any survivors were completely redacted, sealed, and Laya, Reed confirmed, listed as KIA, but the report is weak. No body was ever recovered, no solid confirmation, just presumed dead after an extraction went bad. Hayes leaned forward, his eyes locked on Reed. You think she was a ghost hawk? I think somebody wanted the world to believe she was dead, Reed replied. And now she shows up here, pretending to be a simple desk jockey, letting everyone mock her, letting them think she's weak. But why? The question hung in the air between them. Then Hayes said, his voice barely a whisper, you don't fake your own death unless you're hunting something or someone. She saved a life using skills her file says she shouldn't have. What's her real story? Drop your theories in the comments. And if you're as hooked as I am, share this with a friend who loves a good mystery. Let's see if we can solve this together. The third mission came just 2 days later. An encrypted message came in from a forward operating base in Poland. It was a standard communication, but the camp's only cryptographer, Specialist Vega, was down for the count with a nasty case of food poisoning. That message held targeting coordinates for a live fire drone exercise, and it had to be decoded in the next 20 minutes. Imagine being set up to fail in front of everyone with your career on the line. That's exactly what was happening to Captain Leia. The entire military exercise would be canceled if these coordinates weren't decoded in the next 20 minutes. It would be a colossal waste of money and a huge embarrassment for the command. Colonel Hale, seeing his chance, called Laya into the communications center. Captain, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. Specialist Vega is down. Our replacement cryptographer won't be here for 45 minutes. We only have 20. As the senior intelligence officer here, can you handle this? The room was packed, and every single person was watching, just waiting for her to crash and burn. Think she can pull it off? Stick around. Hale walked out, a smug look on his face. The clock on the wall felt like a bomb. Foster, another officer, sidled up to her, arms crossed. Hey, Captain, no shame in admitting you're out of your league. Just say the word. Laya didn't even look at him. She just pulled up a chair and stared at the mess of scrambled letters and numbers on the screen. 10 seconds ticked by. Then 20. Someone in the back whispered, "She's clueless." But then, her fingers moved, not to the keyboard, but to a pen and a blank sheet of paper. Gotta go old school, she mumbled to herself. Caesar variant, rotating key. Timestamp seed. Foster just frowned, totally confused. Laya ignored him, her pen flying across the page as she scribbled down numbers and letters, cross-referencing them with the message's timestamp. She worked with a blistering, confident speed that left everyone speechless. 3 minutes turned into 5, the only sound in the dead silent room being the scratching of her pen. Then, at the 8-minute mark, she stopped. She turned to the computer and typed in a single, long string of characters. She hit enter. The screen flashed, and just like that, the encrypted gibberish turned into crystal clear text. Coordinates, mission parameters, everything. A technician stared, his jaw on the floor. How did you? Laya stood up. The message is decoded. Get it to the exercise coordinator. She handed her notes to a stunned Foster and walked out of the room. Total time, 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Foster looked down at the paper, covered in calculations and cipher wheels, the kind of work that takes years of training. He flipped it over. Tucked away in a corner was a tiny note, almost invisible, 2 letters and a number, NH7. What on earth did that mean? He snapped a picture and sent it to his contact, Hayes. Found this on Anders's work. Any idea what NH7 means? When Hayes saw that message, his heart sank. He immediately forwarded it to Reed. Run this through your database. Reed opened the image and zoomed in. NH7. Nightingale 7. He pulled up the classified files, and there it was. Nightingale 7, call sign for a Ghost Hawk intelligence operator specializing in cryptography. Status, killed in action, 2019. Reed's hands started to shake. He tried to open the full file, but a red banner flashed across his screen. Access denied. His clearance wasn't high enough. He immediately escalated the request to his SEAL command liaison. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. Commander Reed, this is Captain Ashford from JSOC Operations. You just flagged a file that's been sealed for 5 years. I need to know why. Reed chose his words very carefully. Sir, I have reason to believe one of the operators listed as killed in action might be alive and operating under a false identity. There was a long silence on the line. Stay where you are. Don't talk to anyone about this. A team is on its way. Reed hung up and looked at Hayes. This just got way bigger than us. The very next morning, Laya was assigned to a final test, a live extraction drill. She and 4 trainees had to rescue a high-value target from a fake compound. The enemy would be role players armed with simunition rounds, paint bullets that hurt like crazy but weren't lethal. It was designed to be a realistic, high-pressure scenario. The team met at 0600 hours. Laya, team leader, Briggs, Chen, and 2 others named Novak and Torres. Briggs laid out the plan. Simple, smash and grab. We breach, clear 3 rooms, grab the target, and get out. Expect light resistance. We should be done in 15 minutes. They geared up, loading their magazines with the paint marking rounds. The compound was a run-down, 2-story warehouse with multiple ways in. The target, a guy in an orange vest, was somewhere inside. They stacked up on the main door, and Briggs began the countdown. 3, 2, 1, breach. The door flew open, and they poured inside. Right away, they knew something was wrong. The layout didn't match the blueprints they were given. There was a hallway where there shouldn't have been one. Briggs cursed under his breath, "Map's garbage! Adapt!" They pushed forward. The first room was empty. The second had 2 hostiles. Chen and Torres took them down easily with a flurry of paint rounds. But then more appeared. Way more. It wasn't light resistance, it was an army. 6, then 8, then 10 of them. They were completely outnumbered. Fall back! Regroup! Briggs yelled, but it was too late. Torres took a volley of paint rounds to the chest. He was out. Novak got hit 3 times in the back. He was out, too. Chen screamed that he was out of ammo. I'm dry! Briggs got hit in the shoulder, his arm going numb and making his rifle useless. That left just him and Laya, and they were completely surrounded. Laya took in the scene in a split second. They were trapped in a kill box with no cover and no ammo. This wasn't a training drill, it was a setup. She keyed her standard radio. Command, this is Bravo team. We're taking heavy casualties and request immediate. The radio cut to static. It was being jammed. Of course, it was. Briggs looked at her, paint dripping from his uniform. Captain, we're done for. We have to call it. Laya just stared at the enemies closing in, her team broken around her. Then, she made a decision. She reached into her vest and pulled out a tiny, secondary radio that used a military-grade encryption no one should have on a training exercise. She keyed the mic, and when she spoke, her voice was completely different. It was no longer the quiet, hesitant voice of a staff officer. It was flat, cold, and professional. Nightingale 7 to Overwatch, requesting immediate extraction. Grid November Whiskey 4721, 5 personnel, 1 HVT. Authenticate Tango Hotel November. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a calm male voice crackled back. Nightingale 7, authentication confirmed. QRF is inbound. E. T. A. 2 minutes. The radio went dead. Briggs stared at her, his mind reeling. What in the hell did you just do? Laya didn't answer. She just moved behind cover and drew her sidearm. It was only loaded with paint rounds, but her entire presence had changed. Shoulders back, head high. This wasn't a desk jockey anymore. This was a warrior. The role players closing in on them actually paused, thrown off by her sudden confidence. And then the main door didn't just open, it exploded inward. It wasn't a breaching charge. It was real. 4 operators in full tactical gear, with no identifying marks, stormed the room. They moved like shadows. The role players froze in terror. One of them stammered, this is just a drill. The lead operator didn't even slow down. The drill is over. Clear this area now. They didn't have to be told twice. They scattered like rats. The operators secured the room and had the target extracted in seconds. One of them gave Laya a single, knowing nod, and then they vanished. The entire thing took 90 seconds. Briggs stood there in the warehouse, his mouth hanging open. Who were those guys? Chen whispered. Did we just get rescued by actual special forces? Laya calmly put the safety on her sidearm, holstered it, and turned to her shell-shocked team. For the first time, she looked them straight in the eyes, her gaze firm and unwavering. We need to debrief. Her voice was different. It was a command voice, the kind of voice you obey without question. Briggs just blinked. Captain. Laya walked right past him towards the exit. Move. And they did. They followed. Back at the command center, it was pure chaos. Reed was watching the footage of the extraction on a giant screen, his face as white as a sheet. Hayes stood beside him. On the screen, they saw Laya key her secret radio. Nightingale 7 to Overwatch. Reed's voice was barely a whisper. That call sign was retired in 2019. Hayes pointed at the mysterious operators on the screen. And those guys. I recognize that gear. That's a JSOC quick reaction force. You don't send in a team like that for a training exercise. Reed rewound the footage, focusing on Laya's face. He watched her transform from a meek paper pusher to a stone-cold killer in the blink of an eye. She's not a liaison officer, he said. Hayes grunted. You think? Reed turned to him, the horrifying truth dawning on him. If she's a ghost hawk and she's here under a fake identity, then she's hunting someone. This is a real mission. Hunting someone, Hayes repeated, his eyes drifting to the camera feed from Colonel Hale's office. Hale was on the phone, pacing back and forth, looking furious. Reed's jaw clenched. Oh no, Hayes saw it too. You think Hale is the target? Reed spoke slowly, connecting the dots. I think we need to find out what really happened in 2019 and why the Ghost Hawk program was shut down. On the monitor, Laya walked out of the warehouse. She looked directly up at a security camera, as if she knew they were watching the whole time. And then she smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just cornered her prey. The screen went black. The entire command center went into lockdown. Reed made 3 urgent calls, one to JSOC, one to NATO security, and one to his direct superior at SEAL Command. The message was the same every time. We have a situation. A Ghost Hawk operative is active on site. We need immediate containment and a briefing. Hayes cleared the room until only he and Reed were left. Within 15 minutes, they were joined by 2 others, General Patricia Calloway from JSOC and Colonel Hale himself, who had been summoned without any explanation. He stormed in, looking angry and confused. Commander Reed, someone want to tell me why I was just yanked out of a critical meeting? General Calloway, a woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair and an even steelier gaze, simply stood by the monitors, her arms crossed. She was the camp joke, a captain who couldn't even handle a simple training exercise. For weeks, they'd made her life a living nightmare, all under the watchful eye of Colonel Hale, a decorated war hero with 3 deployments and 2 Purple Hearts. But what he didn't know was that this incompetent captain was about to dismantle his entire world. Stick around, because this story of epic revenge is one you have to hear to believe. In a secure room miles away, General Calloway pointed at a frozen image of that very captain. Colonel Hale, are you familiar with the Ghost Hawk intelligence cell? A flicker of something crossed Hale's face. Vaguely. That was years ago in Syria. The operation was shut down. Calloway's eyes narrowed. Aborted. There's a difference. She gestured to the screen again. What do you know about her? Captain Anders. Hale barely glanced at the picture. A liaison officer. Her performance is adequate, but today's drill showed some concerning judgment. She used unauthorized comms channels. From the side, Commander Reed cut in. Those channels weren't unauthorized, sir. They were classified, Reed explained, reserved for JSOC's quick reaction force. The kind of channels only deep cover operators should have access to. Hale just stared at him. That's impossible. Her clearance level doesn't. Before he could finish, Sergeant Major Hayes hit play on an audio file. The captain's voice filled the room, flat and professional. Nightingale, 7 to Overwatch. Request immediate extract. The command center fell dead silent. Calloway spoke softly, but her words hit like thunderbolts. Nightingale 7 was the call sign for a Ghost Hawk operative back in 2018. A specialist in signals intelligence. An operative who was declared killed in action after an operation was aborted in April of 2019, she turned to face Hale directly. An abort that you authorized, Colonel. The blood drained from Hale's face. That operation was compromised, he stammered. The intelligence showed enemy forces knew we were there. I made a command decision to pull out. It's standard procedure. Calloway's voice turned to ice. 3 operators died during that extraction, Colonel. They died because their air support was pulled without any warning, because their escape route was redirected, because someone decided their mission and their lives were expendable. Hale's fists clenched at his sides. Are you accusing me of something, General? Calloway didn't even blink. I'm asking you to explain why Captain Laya Anders, a woman listed as killed in action for 5 years, is walking around your training camp. And I'm asking why she seems so incredibly interested in watching every single command decision you make. On the main screen, Reed brought up a new file. I accessed the Ghost Hawk records about an hour ago. It required a JSOC override. The abort order in 2019 came just 48 hours before the team was set to capture a notorious arms dealer named Konstantin Volkov. That order came directly from you, Colonel. The reason you listed was an intelligence compromise. But there's no backup documentation, no source, no report, no evidence that the mission was actually blown. Hale's jaw was clenched so tight it looked like it might crack. My sources were confidential. I wasn't required to disclose them. Your sources were paid, Hayes said, holding up a printout. I pulled your financial records. Well, not yours personally. That would need a warrant. But I did pull the records for a shell company, Hayes continued. One registered in your wife's maiden name. On April 10th, 2019, just 2 days before you signed the abort order, a deposit of $200,000 was made. The origin? A holding company with direct links to Volkov's network. The room felt like it was frozen in time. Hale's face turned from ghost white to beet red. That's absurd. You have no proof that money was, Reed cut him off quietly. The transfer code on that deposit is a perfect match to deposits made to 3 other officers who were later convicted of corruption. Same network, same payment pattern, same buyer. Calloway took a step forward. Colonel Hale, you are hereby relieved of command, pending a full investigation. The military police are waiting for you outside. You will surrender your credentials and go with them to detention. Hale looked around the room, his eyes wild with panic. This is insane. You're basing all of this on circumstantial evidence and the word of a woman who's supposed to be dead. It's not just her word, Reed said. He pulled out his phone and played another audio file. This time, it was Hale's own voice, clear as day. Captain Anders needs to go. I don't care how you do it. Reassign her, fail her evaluations, make her life so miserable she puts in for a transfer. Just get her out of my camp. The voice on the other end, Major Cross, sounded confused. Sir, if I can ask, why the big rush? She hasn't caused any real problems. And then Hale's voice again, dripping with paranoia. Because if she stays, people will start asking questions, and I cannot afford questions right now. The recording clicked off. Calloway just raised an eyebrow. That conversation happened 4 days ago, right after Captain Anders arrived on your base. Hale stood there, trembling and silent. Reed pressed on. Captain Anders has been recording everything since the day she got here. Every interaction, every order you gave, every single attempt to sabotage her. She came here knowing someone sold out her team all those years ago. She just didn't know who. So, she set a trap. She let you humiliate her, she let herself look weak and incompetent, and she waited to see who would get scared enough to make a mistake. Hale finally found his voice, sputtering, If she's really Ghost Hawk, she's a security risk. She should be the one detained, not. She's a federal investigator, Calloway said, coldly, cutting him off. Operating under JSOC authority with our full authorization to conduct this inquiry. You, on the other hand, Calloway finished, are under arrest. Just then, the door swung open, and 2 military police officers walked in. Hale stared at them, at the shiny handcuffs they held, at his entire career dissolving into dust right before his eyes. This is a mistake, he whispered. No, Calloway replied. Selling out your own soldiers for money was the mistake. This is the consequence. As they led Hale away, the door clicked shut, leaving a heavy silence in the command center. Hayes finally let out a long breath. Well, that escalated quickly. Reed was still staring at the monitor, at the faint, frozen smile on Leia's face. We need to find her, Calloway nodded. Agreed. Commander, you seem to have a history with Nightingale 7. Care to share? Reed hesitated for a moment, and then he told them everything. About Syria, the convoy, the explosion, the small hands pulling him from the burning wreckage, and the calm voice counting his breaths, keeping him alive. Calloway listened to his story without a single interruption. When he was done, she said, So she saved your life all those years ago, and you never even knew who she was. Not until today, Reed admitted, but I remember her voice. The way she was so calm, like saving my life, was just another item on her to-do list. Hayes pulled up another file on the screen. I called a friend over at the JSOC archives and got some info on the Ghost Hawk insignia. Turns out, operatives who finished 3 successful missions could get the unit tattoo a hawk with its wings spread. Different design details showed where they operated and what their specialty was. He zoomed in on a faded, old photograph. The picture showed the back of an operative in full combat gear, and on their neck was the exact same tattoo Leia had. A hawk facing left means the Syria theater, Hayes explained. Folded wingtips mean the operative has a redacted or secret status. and the text under the hawk is an operation code, 07 Sigma. That was the official designator for the Volkov interdiction mission. Calloway stared at the image. So, everyone on that base saw her tattoo from day one, but nobody understood what they were looking at. Because Ghost Hawk was so classified, Reed said, even their insignia was a secret. Unless you knew exactly what to look for, it just looked like a cool piece of art. And she's been wearing the truth on her skin this whole time, Hayes added, hiding in plain sight. Calloway turned away from the screen. Where is she right now? Reed quickly checked the security feed. She's in the barracks, in her quarters, Reed said. Get her. Bring her here. It's time we all had an honest conversation. Reed and Hayes found Laya in her room. She was sitting on the edge of her bunk, still wearing the tactical gear from the training drill. She didn't look the least bit surprised to see them. Commander? Sergeant Major? She said, her voice perfectly calm and neutral. Reed stepped into the small room as Hayes closed the door behind them. Captain Anders? Reed started, or should I be calling you Nightingale 7? Laya met his gaze. Laya is fine. Reed pulled up a small chair and sat down. Syria, 2018. The convoy ambush outside of Aleppo. You were there. Laya gave a slow, deliberate nod. I was the analyst your team was escorting. You pulled me out, Reed said, his voice thick with emotion. My vehicle was on fire, he continued, the memory flooding back. I was trapped inside. You dragged me to cover. You kept me from bleeding out until the medevac chopper arrived. You were 19, Laya said quietly. You were too young to die just because someone sold your coordinates to the enemy. Reed blinked, stunned. What? That ambush wasn't random, Laya explained. Someone on the inside leaked our route. We lost 2 Marines that day. You were almost the 3rd. Ghost Hawk investigated and found signs of corruption, but we could never prove who was responsible. Hayes, who had been leaning against the wall, finally spoke. So JSOC sent you back undercover to flush out the mole. Laya stood up and walked to the window. Not officially. Officially, I died in 2019 when Colonel Hale aborted the Volkov operation. My body was never recovered, she continued, so the story was closed. But JSOC always suspected Hale was the leak. They just needed solid proof. So they created a new identity for me, a liaison officer with a clean record and 0 combat experience. They made me into someone he would dismiss as a nobody. Reed shook his head in disbelief. You let him tear you down. You let everyone on this base mock you for weeks. It was for evidence, Laya corrected, turning to face them. I needed him to feel comfortable, to think I was completely harmless. Every insult, every time he sabotaged my drills, every single humiliation, I recorded it all. I built a pattern of behavior that proved he was targeting me specifically, which only makes sense if he was terrified I knew who he really was. Hayes finally got it. But if he knew you were Ghost Hawk, why would he target you so openly? Wouldn't that just draw attention? Because he isn't smart, Laya said with a small, cold smile. He's just scared. The moment I showed up, his only instinct was to make me disappear before anyone else could connect the dots. He figured if he could break me and get me to wash out quickly, nobody would ever care or look twice. Reed stood up. You used yourself as bait. I used myself as a test, Laya corrected him. A test to see if Colonel Hale would panic. And he did. Spectacularly. She pulled a tiny device from her pocket. It was a digital recorder. Every conversation, every order he gave to sabotage my gear, every attempt to isolate and humiliate me, it's all right here. It's admissible evidence of command abuse. And when you cross-reference that with his financial records, it proves exactly why he did it. He knew Ghost Hawk was coming back. He just didn't realize it was me until this morning. Hayes let out a soft whistle. You played him masterfully. Hila's expression was unyielding. 3 of my teammates are dead because he accepted money to abort a mission. This isn't about playing games. It's about justice. Reed then voiced the question that had been nagging him. Why did you allow it to get so extreme? The shirt? The public humiliation? You could have revealed your identity much sooner. Laya looked at him, her gaze intense. Because revealing myself only proves that I'm alive. It doesn't prove corruption. I needed Hale to reveal his own hand, to show he was desperate enough to destroy an officer he supposedly didn't even know. That level of desperation is what secures a conviction. Just then, the door opened. Calloway walked in. "Captain Anders, you're needed in the briefing room immediately." As they crossed the camp, soldiers stopped and stared. News that something huge was happening had already started to circulate. Hale's arrest. Military police were everywhere. Rumors were spreading like wildfire. Inside the briefing room, a panel was already assembled. Calloway, 2 investigators from JAG, a legal officer, and, sitting off to one side looking anxious, were Corporal Briggs and Lieutenant Foster. Laya paused and looked at them. Briggs shot to his feet as she came in. "Captain Anders, I owe you an apology for my actions, for the way I treated you." Foster gave a sharp nod. "We both do. We were informed you were just someone who didn't fit in. We never questioned it." Laya calmly studied them. "You were just following the orders of someone you had faith in." "That doesn't justify it," Briggs stated, his voice now steady. "I'm the one who tore your shirt. I publicly shamed you, and I am truly sorry. For whatever it's worth, I'm prepared to testify about every order Hale gave me." Foster chimed in. "I've also recovered his encrypted emails from the server. There are messages with Cross and others coordinating the ways they plan to make you fail. It's all there in writing." Laya gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Thank you." Calloway motioned toward the table. "Captain Anders, please have a seat. We need to take your complete statement." Laya sat down. The recording started. For the following 20 minutes, she detailed everything. Her real identity, the Ghost Hawk mission that was aborted, the deaths, her investigation, her arrival at the camp, every single act of sabotage and harassment, the distinct pattern in Hale's behavior, and all the evidence she had compiled. When she concluded, the room was completely silent. Then Calloway broke the silence. "Captain, I need to understand one thing. You put up with weeks of mistreatment. You allowed people to think you were weak and incompetent. Why didn't you just have Hale arrested right away?" Laya looked down at her hands. "Because arresting him doesn't fix the underlying system. It only gets rid of a single corrupt officer. I had to demonstrate that the system itself permitted this to occur. That it was possible for someone to target an officer, sabotage their career, ruin their reputation, and nobody would challenge it. Everyone witnessed me being broken down. Everyone looked on, and the vast majority did nothing." She lifted her head. "That is the fundamental issue, not Hale. He's merely a symptom. The real sickness is the culture that allowed him to get away with it for this long." The legal officer leaned in. "So, this entire operation wasn't solely about capturing Hale, it was about exposing the very framework that supported him. And creating a permanent record," Leia confirmed, "so that the next individual who decides to speak out will have proof that the system has failed in the past and that it was subsequently corrected. Accountability isn't just about punishment, it's about creating change." Calloway nodded slowly. "I understand. For the official record, your tactics were extremely unconventional but undeniably effective." She looked over at the investigators. "What are your recommendations?" One of the investigators began to speak. "A comprehensive audit of Colonel Hale's command decisions going back 5 years, a full review of all his personnel actions, the implementation of an anonymous reporting channel for soldiers to report retaliation without fear. Mandatory training focused on command climate and the prevention of harassment," the other investigator added, "and the formal recognition of Ghost Hawk operations. That unit has been kept in the shadows for too long. Those operators have earned their acknowledgement." Calloway concurred. "Make it so. Captain Anders, you are officially cleared of any and all suspicion. Your full status has been reinstated. Your service as Ghost Hawk will be added to your permanent service record with the appropriate commendations." Laya simply nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." Calloway then stood. "There's one last thing. JCOC wants to offer you a position as an instructor, SERE, school, teaching survival and resistance methods to the upcoming generation of special operators. You've demonstrated that you can withstand anything. We need individuals like you to train our people." Leia remained silent for a moment before responding. I appreciate that offer, ma'am, but my work here isn't finished. Calloway arched an eyebrow. Finished with what? Leia didn't provide an answer. The meeting concluded. As people started to leave, Reed hung back. Can I ask you a question? She looked at him. It's about Syria, he clarified. When you extracted me, you could have just left me there, taken the intelligence, and gotten out. That would have been the strategically sound move. You were 19, Leia said, echoing his own thoughts. And you were still breathing. That made the choice simple. Reed felt a lump form in his throat. I never had the chance to thank you. You just did, Leia replied. She got to her feet. Commander, it's been a very long day. You should get some rest. She walked towards the door, then stopped. And Reed, you turned out just fine. I'm glad to see it. Then she was gone. Reed remained seated, alone in the quiet room. He noticed his hands were trembling. It wasn't from fear, but from a mix of relief, grief, and immense gratitude, all hitting him at once. Justice had taken years. It had taken incredible patience. It had taken someone who was willing to walk through hell to bring the truth to light. Do you think you could have done it? Hit that thanks button if this story resonated with you, and make sure to subscribe because Phase 2 is on its way, and it's going to be even bigger. That night, a deep quiet settled over the camp. Hale was secured in the detention center. His office was sealed, and all his files had been confiscated. The news traveled fast. Soldiers who had once openly mocked Leia now deliberately avoided making eye contact. Some of them looked ashamed. Others were just confused. And a few were angry, not with her, but with themselves, for not seeing the truth, for not asking questions, for simply following the crowd. Over in the mess hall, Hayes was nursing a cup of coffee. Sergeant Carter sat down with him. I heard the news about Captain Anders, about who she actually is. Hayes nodded. You heard correctly. Carter just shook his head. I saw her shoot. I knew that wasn't ordinary, but I talked myself into believing it was a fluke, the wind, anything besides the obvious truth. We tend to see what we expect to see, Hayes remarked. She was relying on that. Carter fell silent for a moment. So, is she staying? I don't know, Hayes conceded, but I wouldn't count on it. People like her don't tend to stay put for very long. They're always on the hunt for something. Carter got up and left. Hayes sat by himself. He recalled the spent shell casings neatly arranged in triangles, the way Leia controlled her breathing, her sheer discipline. In his 32 years of service, he had seen countless soldiers, but he had never encountered someone who could weaponize humility the way she did, transforming perceived weakness into a formidable strength and patience into a powerful tool. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. In her own quarters, Leia sat on the edge of her bunk. She took out the challenge coin, turning it over and over in her hands. The polished, worn metal glinted in the dim light. On one side was the Hawk insignia, on the other, the serial number GH07114. She placed it on the small table next to her bunk. Then, she opened her laptop. The screen's light filled the dark room. Her inbox displayed a single new message. The sender was encrypted. The subject line was empty. She clicked it open. The message was concise. Tower 4 sends its regards. Target has been confirmed. Ramstein Air Base, Germany. Your estimated time of arrival is 72 hours. Operation Nightfall Phase 2 authentication is Tango Hotel November. Beneath the text were 3 separate attachments. She opened the first one. It was a detailed map of Ramstein Air Base. Key structures were highlighted. It included flight schedules and security patrol rotations. The second attachment was a personnel file. It showed 3 faces, 2 men and 1 woman. Their names were blacked out, but their roles were unmistakable. Logistics officers, contracting officials, and financial administrators. The third attachment contained a single line of text written in bold red. Eliminate the network. Recover the funds. Restore accountability. Leia just stared at the screen. Phase 2. She had been expecting it. Hale was only a single component. The network that had supported him, the one that profited from all the corruption, was still active, still putting soldiers' lives on the line, still exchanging lives for financial gain. JC wanted the entire thing burned to the ground, and they had chosen her to be the one to strike the match. She shut the laptop and leaned her head back against the cool wall. Her entire body ached. The weeks of absorbing physical blows, enduring constant insults, and projecting an image of weakness had taken a serious toll. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. There's a price to be paid for constantly swallowing your pride, for allowing people to treat you as if you are less than human, for watching them laugh at your expense while you suffer. But the plan had worked. Hale was done for. The system was already beginning to change, and now she had the official go-ahead to pursue the remaining targets. She stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the camp was shrouded in darkness. A few scattered lights shone from distant buildings, and sentries walked their familiar patrol routes. It was normal, peaceful. But then she spotted it. A lone figure was standing near the perimeter fence, too far away to make out any clear details, but they were definitely looking at her window. She remained perfectly still, simply observing. The figure lifted an object. Binoculars, they watched her for about 10 seconds, then lowered the optics, raised a radio, and spoke into it. Leia couldn't make out the words, but she knew exactly what they were communicating. The hawk is active. Proceed with phase 2. The figure then turned and walked away, melting back into the shadows. Leia remained at the window for a very long time. She didn't feel a sense of victory. She just felt exhausted, worn out from the constant hunt, tired of living in the shadows, tired of having to pretend to be someone she wasn't. But her fatigue didn't matter. The mission was what mattered. The 3 operators who had lost their lives back in 2019 mattered. The countless others who had been betrayed by individuals like Hale were what mattered. Justice isn't a loud spectacle. It isn't quick. It is patient, systematic, and utterly relentless. And she was exceptionally good at it. She turned away from the window, grabbed her gear bag from beneath her bunk, and began to pack. Extra clothes, medical gear, the challenge coin, her sidearm, everything she would need for the trip to Ramstein. There was a sharp knock on her door. She went rigid, her hand instinctively moving towards her weapon. It's Reed. With a deep breath, she opened the door. Reed was standing there in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Couldn't shut my brain off, he admitted. Figured you were in the same boat. Leia stepped back to let him inside. He sank into the room's only chair while she took a seat on the edge of the bunk. The silence stretched for a moment before Reed broke it. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Tomorrow, Leia confirmed. Before dawn. Ramstein? He guessed. Leia's head tilted slightly. How'd you figure that out? Because I know you, Reed said simply. You don't just cut the head off one snake and call the job done. You follow it back to the nest. Hale was just a symptom. You're going after the disease, and you're gonna find who's spreading it. Reed finished for her. I am. He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. Let me help. Leia just shook her head. This isn't your fight, Reed. You saved my life, he insisted. I owe you this. You don't owe me a thing, she replied, her voice soft but firm. You survived. You became a hell of an officer. That's payment enough. Reed fell silent for a long moment. When I was 19, bleeding out in that Humvee, he started, his voice low. I remember thinking I was about to die. And I was okay with it. I'd signed up, I knew the risks, but then you were there, pulling me out, and you said something that I've never forgotten. What was that? Leia asked. Reed looked her straight in the eye. You said, not today, not on my watch. And for some reason, I believed you. And you were right. Leia glanced away. I was just doing my job. No, Reed countered. You were being you. Someone who never quits. Someone who doesn't leave people behind, he continued. Standing up. Someone who fights for what's right, no matter what it costs. He took a step closer. So if you're going after these people, you don't have to go it alone. The command has resources, backup. You don't have to carry this all by yourself. A faint smile touched Leia's lips. I appreciate the offer, Commander, but some hunts are best done solo. Too many hunters, and the prey just vanishes. Reed gave a slow nod of understanding. Then promise me one thing. When it's over, when you've dismantled the entire network, take a break. For real, let someone else carry the weight for a while. Laya didn't answer. With a sigh, Reed walked to the door and paused. Laya, thank you for everything. She just nodded. Get some rest, Commander. He slipped out and Laya locked the door behind him. She finished stuffing the last of her gear into her pack, then lay down on the bunk, still in her clothes, and stared up at the ceiling. Sleep wasn't coming. It rarely did. Her mind was a slideshow of too many faces, too many voices of people she couldn't save. But she had saved some too. Reed, Lee, a dozen others. That had to mean something. The ceiling fan turned in lazy circles, painting shadows on the walls. She began to breathe, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, again and again. Slowly, the tension left her muscles, her thoughts quieted, and she finally drifted off. She snapped awake at 4:30, when the world was still dark. She dressed in minutes, shouldered her bag, and slipped out of the silent barracks. The base was still, with only the lonely figures of a few sentries moving in the distance. She made her way to the motor pool, found the vehicle assigned to her, and tossed her bag in the back. The engine turned over with a low rumble. As she drove through the main gate, she took one last look in the rearview mirror. The lights of the camp shrank behind her, swallowed by the pre-dawn darkness. She thought of Hale, Briggs, and Foster, all the men who had looked at her and seen someone small, someone quiet, someone they could easily dismiss. They were about to learn that quiet doesn't mean weak, and patience is its own brand of weapon. She pointed the truck east, toward the airfield, toward Germany, toward the next piece of the puzzle. From his window, Hayes watched her taillights disappear down the road. He raised his coffee mug in a silent toast. Back in her office, Laya's challenge coin sat on her empty desk. As the first rays of morning light streamed through the window, they caught the engraved metal. The hawk's wings were spread wide, its talons ready. And beneath it, the motto was etched forever. 07 Sigma. Silent, lethal, forgotten. But Laya was far from forgotten. Not by the lives she had saved, and certainly not by the shadows she was now hunting. She was a ghost, a hawk in the darkness. And ghosts never, ever rest until the job is done. The coin gleamed, a silent promise waiting for its owner's return. It was a clear message to anyone who might find it. The ghost hawk never missed a target, and this time, the target was justice itself.